The candles were already melting by the time anyone remembered to light them. Morty stood in the kitchen doorway, watching her mother push a small cake across the counter with trembling hands. 16 candles, 16 years, and the house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of her father's voice coming from behind a closed door down the hall. "He said he would be here," Renata whispered, more to herself than to her daughter. "He promised Isabella." Isabella did not answer. She had stopped expecting promises to mean anything a long time ago. She pulled out a chair and sat down, folding her hands in her lap, staring at the cake as if it might disappear if she looked away. Footsteps came down the hallway, heavy, quick, distracted. Vincent Morty appeared in the doorway, his phone pressed to his ear, his tie loosened around his neck. He held up one finger toward his wife and daughter, a gesture that meant wait, though it never seemed to mean just a moment. It always meant longer. "No, tell Camille the flowers need to be white and gold, not white and silver," Vincent said into the phone, his voice sharp with irritation. "She wants the mansion covered in orchids. I don't care what it costs. Just get it done." Isabella's stomach tightened at the name. Camille. She had heard it whispered between her parents before, always followed by silence, always followed by her mother's face going pale and still like a photograph. Vincent ended the call and finally looked at the table, at the cake, at his daughter's face. For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes, something that might have been guilt. Then it was gone, replaced by the practiced calm he wore like armor. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," he said, crossing the room and kissing the top of Isabella's head. "I'm sorry I'm late. Business." "You're not late," Isabella said quietly. "You're here for 4 minutes before you leave again." Vincent's jaw tightened. Renata shot her daughter a warning look, but Isabella did not care anymore. She was tired of pretending that everything was fine, tired of watching her mother smile through gritted teeth while her father's world revolved around meetings, calls, and a woman whose name should never have been spoken in their house. "I have somewhere I need to be," Vincent said, checking his watch. "But we'll celebrate properly this weekend, I promise." Isabella almost laughed. Promises from her father were like matches in the wind, small flames that never lasted long enough to warm anything. He left without cutting the cake. Renata lit the candles herself and Isabella blew them out alone, wishing for something she could not quite name. Maybe it was attention, maybe it was the truth, maybe it was simply to be seen. Later that night, after her mother had gone to bed with a headache that Isabella suspected was something closer to heartbreak, Isabella sat by her window and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. Somewhere out there, her father was likely sitting across from a woman named Camille, planning a celebration far grander than the quiet dinner he had missed with his own daughter. Isabella did not know the full extent of what her father did for a living, not really. She knew he was powerful. She knew men lowered their voices when he entered a room, and she knew her family lived in a world where locked doors and hushed conversations were as common as breakfast and homework. Vincent Morty was not a man people said no to, not in business, and apparently not at home either. Her phone buzzed, a message from Alina, her best friend since childhood. "Happy birthday. Did your dad show up this time?" Isabella stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back. "He came for 4 minutes. Then he left for a call about someone else's birthday party." Alina's response came quickly. "What? Whose birthday?" Isabella hesitated before answering. "Camille. I don't know who she is exactly, but I think she's someone my dad cares about more than he lets on." There was a pause before Alina replied. "That's messed up, Bella, I'm sorry." Isabella set the phone down and pulled her knees to her chest. She thought about all the times her father had missed dinners, missed school events, missed the small moments that were supposed to build a life together. She thought about her mother's tired eyes and forced smiles. And she thought about the way her father's voice had changed on the phone, softer somehow, more careful, when he spoke about flowers and orchids for a party that was not hers. The next morning, Isabella came downstairs to find her mother already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Renata's eyes were red-rimmed, though she tried to hide it behind a bright smile when Isabella entered the room. "Good morning, birthday girl," Renata said, though the celebration had technically ended the night before with barely a whisper. "Morning," Isabella replied, pouring herself a glass of juice and sitting across from her mother. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, exactly, but heavy, filled with things neither wanted to say out loud. Finally, Renata reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "I know things have been hard," she said softly. "Your father, he gets consumed by his work. It's not an excuse, but it's the truth. He loves you, Isabella. He just doesn't always know how to show it." Isabella wanted to believe her mother. She wanted to believe that somewhere beneath the phone calls and the meetings and the mysterious woman named Camille, there was a father who thought about his daughter, who wondered if she was happy, who cared about the details of her life the way he seemed to care about orchid arrangements and party themes. But belief was becoming harder to hold onto with each passing year. "Mom," Isabella said carefully, "who is Camille?" Renata's hand went still on the table. For a moment, she looked as though she might answer honestly. Then the mask slipped back into place, the same practiced calm that Isabella had seen on her father's face the night before. "She's someone your father does business with," Renata said, her voice too smooth, too rehearsed. "Nothing more." Isabella did not believe her, but she did not push further. She had learned long ago that some doors in this house were meant to stay closed, that some questions, once asked too many times, only brought more silence in return. The days that followed blurred together in the familiar rhythm of Isabella's life. School, homework, dinners eaten mostly with her mother, and her father appearing only in fragments, a voice from another room, a car pulling away in the driveway, a photograph on the mantel that seemed more real than the man himself. It was Marco who finally gave Isabella a glimpse into the truth she had been circling for weeks. Marco Bellini had worked for her father for as long as Isabella could remember. He was not family by blood, but he had always felt like an uncle, someone who remembered her birthday even when her father forgot the details, someone who asked about her grades and her friends with genuine interest rather than distracted politeness. Isabella found him in the garden one afternoon, sitting on the bench near the fountain, a newspaper folded in his lap though he was not reading it. "You look like someone carrying a heavy bag," Marco said as she approached, his voice gentle, his eyes kind but tired. Isabella sat beside him, pulling her sweater tighter around her shoulders against the autumn wind. "Do you know a woman named Camille?" she asked, deciding there was no point in pretending she did not already suspect the answer. Marco's expression shifted, just slightly, a flicker of discomfort crossing his weathered face. He was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "I know of her," he said finally. "She is someone your father has known for some time." "Is she his girlfriend?" Isabella asked bluntly, tired of dancing around the subject with careful adult language. Marco sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Isabella, these are questions for your father, not for me." "He won't tell me anything," Isabella said, frustration bleeding into her voice. "He barely talks to me at all unless it's to say he's busy or he has somewhere to be. Meanwhile, this woman gets flowers and parties and his full attention. I get 4 minutes on my own birthday." Marco's face softened with something that looked like genuine sympathy. He reached over and patted her hand, the way he had done when she was much younger, and had scraped her knee falling from the old oak tree in the backyard. "Your father is not a bad man," Marco said slowly, "but he is a man who has forgotten how to balance the things that matter most. Business has consumed him, and I fear he has let certain relationships blur the lines he should have kept clear." What does that mean? Isabella pressed. Marco hesitated, glancing around the garden as though the walls themselves might be listening. It means, he said carefully, that Camille is not simply a business associate, and I worry that your father does not see her clearly. He sees what he wants to see. Isabella absorbed this information in silence, feeling something cold settle in her chest. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed, even in careful, guarded words, made it feel more real, more permanent. "Does my mother know?" she asked quietly. "Your mother knows more than she lets on," Marco said. "She is a strong woman, Isabella, stronger than you realize, but strength does not mean the pain is any less." That evening, Isabella watched her father from the top of the staircase as he prepared to leave the house again, dressed in an expensive suit, his cologne trailing behind him like a warning. He paused at the door, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror, adjusting his collar with the focused attention of a man preparing for something important. "Where are you going?" Isabella called down, unable to stop herself. Vincent looked up, startled by her voice. "Just a dinner meeting," he said. "I won't be too late." "Is it with Camille?" Isabella asked, watching her father's face carefully. The silence that followed was answer enough. Vincent's expression tightened, and for a moment, Isabella thought he might actually explain himself, might finally offer some honesty in a house built on careful omissions. Instead, he simply said, "Get some rest, Isabella. We'll talk soon," before slipping out the door into the cool night air. Isabella stood at the top of the stairs long after the sound of his car had faded into the distance. She thought about the birthday she had just had, the 4 minutes he had given her, the promises he had made and broken so easily. She thought about the woman named Camille, whose flowers were white and gold, whose parties were apparently worth planning with such urgency and care. And she made a quiet decision, one that settled in her chest like a stone. She would find out exactly who Camille was, and exactly what she meant to her father, no matter how much it hurt to learn the truth. Downstairs, her mother sat alone in the living room, the television flickering unwatched, a glass of wine untouched on the side table. Isabella walked down and sat beside her, resting her head on her mother's shoulder the way she had when she was small, and the world felt too big and too complicated to face alone. "I love you, Mom," Isabella said softly. Renata wrapped an arm around her daughter and held her close. "I love you too, sweetheart, more than anything in this world." Outside, the city lights continued to glow, indifferent to the quiet heartbreak unfolding inside the Morty house. Somewhere across town, Vincent Morty sat across a candle-lit table from Camille DeLuca, laughing at something she said, his attention fully hers in a way it had not been for his own daughter in longer than either of them could remember. The birthday cake sat forgotten in the refrigerator, half-eaten, the candles thrown away, the wish Isabella had made drifting further from reality with each passing day. But something had shifted in her that night, a quiet resolve forming beneath the hurt. She would not stay silent forever. She would not remain invisible in her own family. Not anymore. The following afternoon, Alina arrived at the Morty house carrying a small bag of pastries from the bakery near the school, a belated birthday gift she insisted on delivering in person. Isabella met her at the gate, grateful for the sight of a familiar, uncomplicated face. "I brought the cinnamon ones you like," Alina said, holding up the bag as if it were a peace offering to the world itself. "Figured you could use something sweet after the birthday you described." They walked together through the garden, past the fountain where Isabella had spoken with Marco the day before, and settled onto a stone bench beneath a wide, leafy tree. Alina unwrapped the pastries and handed one to Isabella, watching her friend's face with quiet concern. "So tell me everything," Alina said. "Who is this Camille person really?" Isabella hesitated, unsure how much to share even with her closest friend. Some instinct told her that the less spoken aloud about her father's private life, the safer everyone remained. but the weight of carrying it alone had become unbearable. "I don't know all the details," Isabella admitted. "But from what Marco said, and from the way my parents both go quiet whenever her name comes up, I think she's more than just someone my father does business with. I think she might be his mistress." Elena's eyes widened. "Bella, that's awful. Does your mom know for sure?" "I think she's known for a while," Isabella said, picking at the pastry without much appetite. "She just doesn't say it out loud. Maybe saying it out loud makes it too real." Elena reached over and squeezed her friend's hand. "You deserve better than this. Your birthday should have been about you, not about whatever party your dad is planning for someone else." "He's throwing her a party," Isabella said, the words tasting bitter as she spoke them. "A big one from what I overheard. Orchids everywhere, white and gold decorations, guests flown in. My birthday got a store-bought cake and 4 minutes of his time." Elena shook her head slowly, anger flashing across her usually gentle features. "That's not fair. None of this is fair to you or your mom." "No," Isabella agreed quietly, "it isn't." They sat in silence for a while, the autumn wind rustling the leaves above them, carrying with it the scent of the last blooming flowers in the garden. Isabella found comfort in Elena's presence, in the simple fact that someone outside her family understood, even a little, what she was going through. "What are you going to do?" Elena finally asked. Isabella considered the question carefully. She thought about her mother's tired eyes, her father's distracted affection, the strange weight of growing up in a house full of secrets she was only beginning to understand. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I can't keep pretending everything is fine. I can't keep smiling and accepting 4 minutes here and there like it's enough. I want the truth, even if it hurts." Elena nodded slowly, respecting the determination she saw settling into her friend's expression. "Just be careful, Bella. Whatever your dad is involved in, it sounds like it's bigger than just a normal family problem." Isabella knew Elena was right, though she did not fully understand the shape of the danger her friend sensed. She only knew that something was shifting in her family, something fragile and long hidden that could not stay buried forever. Later that evening, Isabella found her mother in the study, sorting through a stack of mail and invitations, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. Among the envelopes, one stood out, thick and cream-colored, embossed with gold lettering that caught the lamp light. "What's that one?" Isabella asked, nodding toward the elaborate envelope resting apart from the others. Renata's fingers stilled over the paper. For a moment, she looked as though she might slide it beneath the pile and pretend it did not exist. Instead, she picked it up and studied it with an expression Isabella could not quite read, somewhere between resignation and quiet fury. "It's an invitation," Renata said finally, her voice carefully controlled. "To a birthday celebration. Your father wants me to attend, apparently, as a show of support for the family business." Isabella's chest tightened. "Whose birthday?" Renata looked up at her daughter, and for the first time in longer than Isabella could remember, she saw something raw and unguarded in her mother's eyes, a flash of pain too large to hide behind practiced calm. "Camille's," Renata said simply. "He wants me there, Isabella. He wants both of us there to smile and pretend that everything about this arrangement is perfectly normal." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Isabella had suspected the truth for days, but hearing her mother confirm it so plainly felt like a door finally swinging open onto a room she had always known existed, but had never been allowed to enter. "Are you going to go?" Isabella asked quietly. Renata set the invitation down on the desk, smoothing the edge of the paper with trembling fingers. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to refuse, to tell your father exactly what I think of this humiliation he's asking me to endure. But another part of me knows that, in this family, in this life, refusing your father is not always simple." Isabella did not fully understand what her mother meant, not yet. but she sensed the deeper truth lurking beneath the words, the unspoken reality of the world her father had built around them, a world where power and fear were often woven together in ways she was only beginning to glimpse. "I want to go too," Isabella said suddenly, surprising even herself with the decision. Renata's head snapped up. "Absolutely not, Isabella. This is not a place for you." "Why not?" Isabella pressed. "If you have to be there pretending everything is fine, why should I stay home pretending I don't know the truth? I want to see her. I want to understand what my father has chosen over his own family." Renata studied her daughter for a long moment, seeing perhaps for the first time how much she had grown, how much quiet strength had been forming beneath the surface of her carefully polite exterior. Finally, she sighed, the fight draining from her posture. "If you truly want to go, I won't stop you," Renata said softly. "But Isabella, promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't do anything reckless once we're there." Isabella nodded, though privately she made no such promise to herself. She was tired of careful. She was tired of quiet. Something inside her had shifted since the candles on her birthday cake had gone unlit for those first agonizing minutes, since her father's 4 minutes of attention had felt like an insult rather than a gift. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Isabella thought about the invitation sitting on her mother's desk, about the elaborate party being planned for a woman she had never met, about the strange, complicated shape of the family she belonged to. She thought about her father's voice on the phone, softer and more attentive than she had heard it in years, directed toward flowers and decorations for someone else's celebration. She thought about her mother's quiet suffering, endured silently for the sake of appearances, for the sake of a marriage that seemed to be crumbling in slow, invisible increments. And she thought about herself, 16 years old, standing at the edge of a truth too large to ignore any longer. Whatever happened at that party, whatever she learned about Camille and her father's world, Isabella knew that things could never go back to the way they had been before. The 4 minutes of her birthday had cracked something open inside her, and there would be no closing it again, no matter how much her family wished to pretend that everything remained exactly as it should be. The city lights glittered outside her window, indifferent and constant, as Isabella finally closed her eyes, bracing herself for whatever the coming days would reveal. The mansion looked like something built for royalty, not for a single night of celebration. Isabella stepped out of the car behind her mother, her eyes tracing the endless rows of white and gold orchids that lined the marble staircase leading to the entrance. Strings of lights hung between the trees like captured stars, and somewhere beyond the tall glass doors, music drifted out into the cool evening air, elegant and expensive, the kind of sound that came from a live orchestra rather than speakers. "This is insane," Isabella whispered, staring up at the building. Renata's face remained composed, though Isabella could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful way her mother held herself together as they approached the entrance. "Your father spared no expense," Renata said quietly. "He never does when it comes to her." They were greeted at the door by a member of the household staff, who checked their names against a list before ushering them inside. Isabella had expected a party. She had not expected a spectacle of this magnitude, with ice sculptures shaped like swans, tables overflowing with food from every corner of the world, and a small orchestra playing near a dance floor already crowded with guests in designer gowns and tailored suits. Isabella scanned the room, searching for her father, and found him standing near the center of it all, laughing at something a guest had said, a glass of champagne in his hand. He looked relaxed in a way Isabella had rarely seen at home, his posture open, his smile easy and unguarded. Beside him stood a woman Isabella immediately recognized, though they had never formally met. Camille de Luca was stunning in a way that seemed almost calculated, her dress a deep shade of gold that matched the orchids lining the staircase, her dark hair styled in soft waves around her face. She laughed at something Vincent said, resting a hand on his arm with a familiarity that made Isabella's stomach turn. "There they are," Renata murmured, her voice tight. Vincent spotted them across the room, and for a brief moment, his expression flickered with something like discomfort before smoothing back into practiced charm. He excused himself from the group and made his way toward his wife and daughter, though his pace seemed unhurried, almost reluctant. "You made it," he said, kissing Renata's cheek and then Isabella's, his cologne overwhelming in the warm air of the crowded room. "You invited us," Renata replied evenly. "It would have been rude to refuse." Vincent's jaw tightened slightly at the edge in her voice, but he said nothing, instead gesturing toward the woman who had followed him across the room. "Camille, this is my wife Renata, and my daughter Isabella." Camille's smile widened, though it did not reach her eyes when she looked at Renata. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you both," she said, her voice smooth and rehearsed. "Vincent speaks of you often." Isabella doubted that very much, though she kept the thought to herself, offering only a tight, polite smile in return. Camille's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, assessing, calculating, as though trying to determine exactly how much of a threat the teenage girl in front of her might pose. "Happy birthday," Isabella said, the words feeling like sand in her mouth. "Thank you, sweetheart," Camille replied, her tone dripping with a false warmth that made Isabella's skin crawl. "Your father has been so generous, hasn't he? All of this just for me." The comment landed exactly where it was intended. A quiet blade slipped between ribs. Isabella felt her mother stiffen beside her, though Renata's face remained a mask of practiced composure. "Yes," Isabella said, meeting Camille's gaze directly. "He certainly knows how to celebrate the people he chooses to focus on." Something flickered across Camille's expression, a brief flash of surprise at the teenager's directness, before she laughed lightly and turned back toward Vincent, looping her arm through his. "Come, darling, there are people who want to wish me happy birthday." Vincent glanced back at Renata and Isabella, an unreadable expression crossing his face, before allowing himself to be led away into the crowd. Isabella watched him go, watched the easy way he moved beside Camille, the attentiveness he showed her with every small gesture, and felt something inside her chest crack a little further. "Come," Renata said softly, guiding her daughter toward a quieter corner of the room. "Let's find somewhere to sit." They settled at a small table near the edge of the dance floor, close enough to observe the party, but distant enough to feel somewhat removed from its glittering excess. A waiter offered them drinks, and Renata accepted a glass of wine while Isabella took a sparkling water, her stomach too unsettled for anything else. "I told you this wouldn't be easy," Renata said quietly, watching Vincent and Camille from across the room as they danced, surrounded by admiring guests. "I didn't think it would be easy," Isabella replied, "but I didn't expect it to feel like this either." Renata reached over and took her daughter's hand, holding it tightly. "I'm sorry you have to witness this. No child should have to see their father behave this way." Isabella watched the couple dance, watched her father's hand rest at Camille's waist, watched the way he leaned in close to whisper something that made her laugh. It was strange, watching him be so present, so engaged, so entirely himself in a way he rarely was at home. "Mom," Isabella said quietly, "how long has this been going on?" Renata's grip on her daughter's hand tightened almost imperceptibly. "Longer than I'd like to admit," she said finally. "I found out about a year ago, though I suspect it started before that." "Why did you stay?" Isabella asked, the question tumbling out before she could stop herself. Renata was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant, fixed on some point beyond the crowded dance floor. "Because leaving your father is not as simple as packing a bag and walking away," she said finally. "There are things about his world, about the business he runs, that make everything more complicated than an ordinary marriage." Isabella wanted to ask more, wanted to understand fully what her mother meant, but before she could press further, a familiar figure appeared beside their table. "Isabella," Marco said, his voice warm despite the tension visible in his expression. "I didn't expect to see you here." "My mother thought it best I understand the full picture," Isabella said, glancing toward the dance floor where her father and Camille continued their performance for the crowd. Marco's eyes followed her gaze, and something like disapproval flickered across his weathered features. "This party," he said quietly, sitting down beside them, "it is more than what it appears to be." "What do you mean?" Renata asked, her attention sharpening. Marco glanced around the room, lowering his voice further. "Camille has been asking questions about the business, about certain arrangements that should remain private. I have noticed her speaking with men I do not recognize, men who do not belong at a celebration like this." Isabella felt a chill run through her, unrelated to the temperature of the room. "What kind of men?" "I cannot say for certain," Marco admitted, "but my instincts tell me something is not right. Your father is too consumed by his affection for her to see what I see." Renata's face had gone pale, the earlier tension in her posture giving way to something closer to fear. "Have you spoken to Vincent about this?" "I have tried," Marco said, frustration evident in his voice. "But he dismisses my concerns. He believes I am simply jealous of his happiness, that I do not understand what it means to feel young again." Isabella watched her father across the room, still dancing, still laughing, entirely unaware of the concerns being voiced at their small table near the edge of his celebration. She thought about the invitation sitting on her mother's desk, about the careful calculation in Camille's eyes when they had first met, about the strange men Marco claimed to have noticed lurking at the edges of the party. Something was wrong, and her father was too blinded by infatuation to see it. The evening continued, the party growing louder and more elaborate as the hours passed. Isabella watched from her corner table, occasionally exchanging quiet words with her mother and Marco, but mostly observing, cataloging every detail of Camille's behavior, every glance she exchanged with unfamiliar guests, every moment of practiced charm directed at her father. At one point, Isabella excused herself to find a restroom, weaving through the crowded hallways of the mansion until she found herself in a quieter corridor away from the main celebration. She paused near an open doorway, catching fragments of a conversation that made her freeze in place. "The deal needs to happen before the end of the month," a man's voice said, low and urgent. "Vincent cannot know the details until it's too late to stop it." "He won't know anything," Camille's voice replied, cool and confident. "He trusts me completely." "That trust is exactly what makes this possible." Isabella's heart pounded as she pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear more, but footsteps approaching from the other direction forced her to retreat quickly, slipping back into the crowded hallway before anyone noticed her presence. She found her mother still seated at their table, Marco standing beside her, both watching the dance floor with matching expressions of quiet concern. "I need to tell you something," Isabella said, her voice trembling slightly as she sat down. Renata's face immediately sharpened with worry. "What is it, Isabella? What happened?" Isabella recounted the conversation she had overheard, watching Marco's expression grow increasingly grim with each word. When she finished, silence settled over their small table, heavy and foreboding. "This confirms my suspicions," Marco said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Camille is planning something that could threaten everything your father has built." "We have to tell him," Renata said urgently. Marco shook his head slowly. "He will not listen, not tonight, not while he is under her spell so completely. We need proof, something undeniable, before we approach him with these concerns." Isabella looked across the room once more at her father, still laughing, still entirely unaware of the danger circling closer with every passing moment. The party continued around them, glittering and oblivious, while beneath the surface, Something far more dangerous than a forgotten birthday was beginning to take shape. As the evening wound toward its end, Vincent finally made his way back toward their table, his cheeks flushed with champagne and satisfaction, entirely unaware of the quiet storm gathering around him. "Are you enjoying yourselves?" he asked, settling into the chair beside Renata, though his eyes drifted back toward Camille, who stood surrounded by admirers near the dance floor. "It's certainly memorable," Renata said carefully, exchanging a brief glance with Marco. Isabella studied her father's face, searching for some sign of the man she remembered from earlier years before the distance had grown so wide between them. She found only distraction, only distance, only the faint outline of someone she barely recognized anymore. "Dad," Isabella said quietly, "can we talk, just for a minute?" Vincent glanced at his watch, then back at the dance floor where Camille had begun searching the crowd for him. "Not tonight, sweetheart. This isn't the time." The rejection landed with familiar weight, though Isabella had almost expected it by now. She nodded silently, swallowing the words she had wanted to say, the questions she had wanted to ask, the truth she had wanted to share about the conversation she had overheard. As Vincent excused himself once more, drawn back toward Camille's side, Isabella exchanged a look with her mother that needed no words. Something had to change. Something had to give. And whatever storm was building beneath the glittering surface of this celebration would eventually break, whether Vincent Morty was ready to see it coming or not. The drive home was silent, the mansion's lights fading behind them as Renata navigated the dark roads with white-knuckled hands. Isabella stared out the window, replaying the overheard conversation in her mind, wondering what deal Camille had been discussing, wondering how much danger truly surrounded their family now. Whatever happened next, Isabella knew one thing with absolute certainty. The truth would not stay hidden much longer, no matter how desperately her father wanted to believe otherwise. Back at the house, Renata poured herself another glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table, staring into the dark liquid as though it might offer answers the evening had failed to provide. Isabella sat across from her, still wearing the dress she had chosen so carefully, though now it felt foolish, a costume for a performance she had never wanted a part in. "I keep thinking about what Marco said," Isabella admitted, breaking the heavy silence between them. "About needing proof before we can tell Dad anything." "Marco is right to be cautious," Renata said, swirling her wine absently. "Your father does not respond well to accusations, especially not against someone he trusts. We need to be certain before we say anything that could make this situation worse." "But what if waiting makes it worse?" Isabella pressed. "What if by the time we have proof it's already too late?" Renata set down her glass and looked at her daughter with an expression that mixed pride and worry in equal measure. "You've grown up so much in these past few months," she said softly. "I remember when you were still a little girl who believed her father could do no wrong." "That little girl grew up fast," Isabella said, a hint of bitterness coloring her voice. "She had to." Renata reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. "I'm sorry, Isabella. Sorry that your childhood got tangled up in all of this. You deserved better." "We both did," Isabella said quietly. They sat together for a long while, the kitchen clock ticking steadily in the background, marking the passage of a night that had revealed far more than either of them had anticipated when they first stepped through the mansion's grand doors. Eventually, Renata rose and pressed a kiss to the top of Isabella's head before heading upstairs, leaving her daughter alone with her thoughts. Isabella did not go to bed right away. Instead, she pulled out her phone and typed a message to Alina, recounting the strange conversation she had overheard, the unfamiliar men circling the edges of the celebration, the growing sense that something dangerous was unfolding beneath her father's obliviousness. Alina's response came quickly, despite the late hour. "That sounds terrifying, Bella. Please be careful. If Camille is really planning something against your dad's business, that could put your whole family at risk. I know, Isabella typed back, but I don't know what to do. Marco says we need proof before we can convince my dad of anything. Maybe you should pay attention to who she talks to, Alina suggested. If she's meeting with people your dad doesn't know about, there might be a pattern you can find. Isabella considered this advice carefully. She thought about the hushed conversation in the hallway, about the calculated way Camille had looked at her when they first met, assessing, weighing, deciding how much of a threat a 16-year-old girl might represent to her carefully constructed plans. Perhaps Camille had underestimated her. The following days passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Isabella attended school, completed her homework, and maintained the appearance of an ordinary teenage life, all while her mind circled endlessly around the mystery unfolding within her family. She found herself watching for any sign of Camille whenever her father mentioned business dinners or evening meetings, cataloging the pattern of his absences with a new, sharper attention. Marco visited the house more frequently during this period, ostensibly for business matters with Vincent, though Isabella suspected his true purpose involved keeping a closer watch on the situation developing around them. He would often find a quiet moment to speak with Isabella or Renata, sharing small pieces of information he had gathered, fragments that slowly began forming a larger, more troubling picture. I've learned that Camille has been meeting regularly with a man named Salvatore Conti, Marco told them one afternoon, his voice low despite the empty house around them. Conti runs operations for a rival family, one that has been trying to expand into territory your father controls. Do you think she's working with them? Renata asked, her face pale with growing concern. I believe it's possible, Marco said grimly, perhaps even likely. If Camille has been feeding information about your father's operations to Conti, it could explain the deal I overheard mentioned at the party. Isabella felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. What happens if Dad finds out too late? What happens to us? Marco's expression grew even more serious. That is precisely why we must proceed carefully, Isabella. Your father's enemies would show no mercy to his family if given the opportunity. We need to expose Camille's betrayal before it can be used against him, before anyone we love becomes a target. The weight of those words settled heavily over the room, transforming what had begun as a story of neglect and heartbreak into something far more dangerous, something that threatened not just Isabella's relationship with her father, but potentially the safety of everyone she loved. As the days continued to pass, Isabella found herself watching her father with new eyes, no longer simply hurt by his distraction and absence, but genuinely afraid for what might be coming, for the storm that Camille's ambitions might unleash upon their family if left unchecked for much longer. The photograph landed on the kitchen table like a small explosion. This is Salvatore Conti, Marco said, tapping his finger against the grainy image of a man in a dark coat, standing outside a restaurant Isabella did not recognize. And this, he continued, sliding another photograph forward, is Camille meeting with him 3 days ago, less than a mile from your father's main office. Renata leaned over the table, studying the images with sharp, focused attention. How did you get these? I have people I trust, Marco said simply. People who have watched Camille's movements for the past week, ever since the party confirmed my suspicions. Isabella stared at the photograph, at the woman who had smiled so falsely at her weeks earlier, who had worn her father's affection like a trophy while secretly meeting with the enemy of everything he had built. Anger simmered beneath her earlier fear, a slow burning fury that had been growing steadily since the night of that lavish, dangerous celebration. We need to show these to Dad, Isabella said firmly. Marco shook his head, his expression cautious. Not yet. Photographs alone will not be enough. Your father will accuse us of manipulation, of jealousy, of trying to destroy something he believes is genuine. We need more than images. We need proof of exactly what is being discussed, what is being planned. How do we get that? Renata asked, her voice tight with barely restrained anxiety. Marco hesitated before answering, glancing between mother and daughter, as though weighing how much responsibility he was willing to place on their shoulders. There is a way, he said finally, but it requires patience, and it requires all of us being very careful about what we say and do in the coming days. Isabella listened intently as Marco outlined his plan, a careful strategy involving discreet surveillance and quiet conversations with people loyal to Vincent rather than to Camille's growing influence. It was clear that Marco had been thinking about this for some time, weighing every possible risk, every potential consequence of exposing Camille too early or too late. In the meantime, Marco said, you both need to behave exactly as you have been. Camille cannot suspect that anyone is watching her closely. If she believes she has been discovered before we have solid proof, she may accelerate whatever plan she has been building with Conti. The weeks that followed tested Isabella's patience in ways she had never experienced before. She continued attending school, continued her ordinary routines, all while carrying the enormous weight of secrets that could shatter her family's entire world. She watched her father come and go, oblivious to the danger circling him, still consumed by his infatuation with a woman who was actively working against everything he had spent his life protecting. Renata, too, seemed to be unraveling slowly beneath the strain of maintaining normalcy while harboring such devastating knowledge. Isabella noticed the dark circles forming beneath her mother's eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly when she poured her morning coffee, the forced brightness in her voice whenever Vincent was present. I don't know how much longer I can pretend everything is fine, Renata confessed to Isabella one evening, after Vincent had left for yet another dinner meeting that likely involved Camille's calculated charm. Watching him walk out that door, knowing what she might be planning, knowing he has no idea the danger he's walking into. We're doing what Marco said, Isabella reminded her mother gently. We're gathering proof. It won't be much longer now. Renata offered a weak smile, though the worry never fully left her eyes. You've become so strong, Isabella. Stronger than I ever expected you to need to be at your age. Isabella thought about those words often in the days that followed, wondering if strength was simply another word for exhaustion, for the constant vigilance required to protect people who remained blissfully unaware of the threats gathering around them. Alina remained a steady source of support throughout this difficult period, though Isabella had to be careful about how much she shared, even with her closest friend. The danger surrounding her family felt too large, too real, to risk spreading knowledge that could somehow find its way back to Camille or her associates. You seem different lately, Alina observed one afternoon as they walked home from school together. More serious. More watchful. There's a lot going on at home, Isabella admitted, choosing her words carefully. I can't really talk about the details, but things are complicated right now. Alina studied her friend's face with concern. Is it about that woman, Camille? Isabella nodded slowly. It's gotten more serious than I thought. I can't say more right now, but please, just trust me when I say you should stay away from anything connected to my dad's business for a while. Alina's eyes widened slightly, though she nodded in understanding. I trust you, Bella. Just please be careful. Whatever this is, it sounds bigger than anything either of us has dealt with before. Isabella appreciated her friend's willingness to accept the boundaries she had set, even without full explanation. It was a small comfort in the midst of so much uncertainty, knowing that at least one person outside the tangled web of her family's secrets remained loyal and supportive. Marco's investigation continued to yield disturbing results as the days passed. He arrived at the house one evening with fresh information, his expression grimmer than Isabella had ever seen it. Camille has been providing Conti with detailed information about your father's shipping routes, Marco explained, spreading a series of documents across the kitchen table. Financial records, security schedules, even personal details about the family. Everything Conti needs to move against your father at exactly the right moment. Isabella felt sick reading through the documents, seeing her family's private information laid bare, knowing that a woman her father trusted completely had been systematically dismantling his defenses from the inside. "There's more," Marco continued, his voice heavy with reluctance. "I discovered that Camille's relationship with your father was never genuine from the beginning. She was placed in his life deliberately, months ago, specifically to gain access to information that could benefit Conti's operations." Renata's face went pale, her hand flying to cover her mouth in shock. This entire relationship was manufactured, a setup from the very beginning. "It appears so," Marco confirmed grimly. "Your father has been the target of a carefully orchestrated plan, one designed to exploit his weaknesses, his desire for something new and exciting outside the responsibilities of his everyday life." Isabella absorbed this revelation with a strange mixture of vindication and horror. Vindication, because it confirmed everything she had suspected about Camille's true nature, about the falseness behind her practiced smiles and calculated charm. Horror, because it meant her father had been played as a pawn in a dangerous game far larger than any of them had initially realized. "We have to tell him now," Isabella said urgently. "Whatever risk there is in confronting him, it's smaller than the risk of letting this continue." Marco nodded slowly, his expression resolute. "I agree. We have enough proof now, but we need to choose the right moment, somewhere he cannot dismiss us easily, somewhere the truth cannot be denied." As they discussed the best approach for revealing everything to Vincent, Isabella felt a strange calm settling over her, replacing the fear and uncertainty that had plagued her for weeks. She had spent so long feeling invisible in her own family, overshadowed by her father's obsession with a woman who had never truly cared for him at all. Now she found herself at the center of something crucial, someone whose observations and courage might ultimately save her family from a danger they had not seen coming. That night, as Isabella lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she thought about the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. It had started with a forgotten birthday, with 4 rushed minutes of her father's attention before he disappeared into the arms of a woman planning his downfall. It had grown into something far more significant, a battle not just for her father's love and attention, but for the safety and survival of everyone she cared about. Whatever happened next, whatever confrontation awaited them, Isabella knew she would face it without flinching. She had spent too long standing in the shadows, waiting to be noticed, waiting to be prioritized. Now she stood ready to step into the light, armed with truth and determined to protect the family that had so often overlooked her. A few days before Marco's final revelations, Isabella had encountered Camille unexpectedly at a small cafe near her school, a chance meeting that neither of them could have entirely anticipated. Isabella had been sitting alone at a corner table, finishing homework before heading home, when the door chimed and Camille walked in, dressed casually in a way that made her seem almost ordinary, almost human, rather than the calculating figure Isabella now understood her to be. Camille spotted her immediately, and for a moment, something like hesitation crossed her face before she approached the table with practiced confidence. "Isabella," Camille said, settling into the chair across from her without waiting for an invitation. "What a surprise." "Is it?" Isabella asked coolly, closing her notebook and studying the woman across from her with newfound clarity. "This cafe is close to my school. I'd think you'd know that, given how thoroughly you seem to research things." Camille's smile flickered just slightly, though she recovered quickly. "I'm not sure what you mean by that." "I think you know exactly what I mean," Isabella said, keeping her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. I saw you at the party, whispering with a man in the hallway. I heard you talking about a deal, about my father not knowing until it was too late. For a moment, something genuine flickered across Camille's carefully composed features. A flash of surprise, perhaps even fear, before the mask slid back into place. You misunderstood whatever you overheard, she said smoothly. Business conversations often sound more dramatic than they actually are. I don't think I misunderstood anything, Isabella said, holding the older woman's gaze without flinching. I think you've been using my father this whole time. I think everything about your relationship with him has been a lie, built for some purpose that has nothing to do with actually caring about him. Camille's expression hardened, the warmth completely draining from her face, replaced by something colder, more calculating. You're a smart girl, Isabella, smarter than your father gives you credit for, apparently. But you should be very careful about the accusations you make, and to whom you make them. Is that a threat? Isabella asked, refusing to let her voice waver despite the fear coiling in her stomach. It's advice, Camille said, rising from her seat with practiced grace. Some truths are better left undiscovered, especially by children who don't fully understand the world their families operate within. She left without another word, disappearing back onto the busy street, leaving Isabella alone with her racing heart and the unsettling confirmation that she had, in fact, stumbled onto something far more dangerous than she had initially realized. She reported the encounter to Marco that evening, watching his expression grow increasingly concerned as she recounted every detail. You need to be extremely careful from now on, Marco warned her. If Camille suspects that you know too much, she may accelerate her plans, or worse, she may see you as an obstacle that needs to be removed from her path entirely. The warning settled over Isabella like a heavy blanket, transforming her fear into something sharper, more focused. She had crossed a line during that encounter at the cafe, revealing her knowledge to Camille directly, and there was no way to undo that mistake now. All she could do was move forward, help Marco gather the remaining evidence needed, and hope that they could expose the truth before Camille's dangerous plans reached their conclusion. In the days that followed, Isabella noticed subtle changes in her surroundings that heightened her unease. A car she did not recognize seemed to linger near the school parking lot more often than usual. Strange numbers called her phone late at night, always disconnecting before she could answer. She mentioned these details to Marco, who confirmed her fears were not simply paranoia. Camille is testing the boundaries, Marco explained grimly. She wants to know how much you know and how far you're willing to go to expose her. We cannot afford to wait much longer. Renata, upon learning of these unsettling developments, insisted on keeping Isabella closer to home, arranging for a trusted driver to accompany her to and from school rather than allowing her to walk with Alina as she normally did. The precautions felt suffocating, a stark reminder of just how serious the situation had become, how far beyond an ordinary family conflict this entire affair had grown. I hate this, Isabella confessed to her mother one evening, watching the unfamiliar driver wait outside their gate. I hate that we have to live like this because of decisions Dad made. I know, Renata said softly, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. But it won't be much longer now. Marco believes we have enough evidence to confront your father soon. Once the truth comes out, once Camille's true intentions are exposed, we can begin rebuilding some sense of normalcy. Isabella wanted desperately to believe her mother's reassurances, though the uncertainty of what confronting her father might unleash weighed heavily on her thoughts. She had witnessed his temper before, the controlled fury that simmered beneath his polished exterior whenever business matters went poorly. She could only imagine how he might react upon learning that the woman he had chosen over his own family had been systematically betraying him from the very beginning. The following morning, Marco arrived early, his face set with grim determination. "It's time," he said simply, glancing between Isabella and her mother. Vincent has a meeting scheduled at the house this afternoon, a small gathering with some of his closest associates. It will be the perfect opportunity to present the evidence in front of witnesses who cannot be easily dismissed or ignored. Renata's hands trembled slightly as she nodded. Are you certain this is the right approach, confronting him publicly in front of others? It is the only way to ensure he truly listens, Marco said firmly. Alone, he might dismiss our concerns as jealousy or paranoia, but with evidence presented before people he respects, people whose opinions matter to him, he will have no choice but to confront the truth. Isabella felt her heart pounding as the reality of the coming confrontation settled over her. This was the moment she had been building toward, the culmination of weeks of careful observation, painful revelations, and growing determination. Whatever happened next would change everything, not just for her relationship with her father, but for the entire fragile structure of her family's future. As the afternoon approached, Isabella dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that felt both appropriate and empowering, something that would allow her to stand confidently before her father and his associates when the moment finally arrived. She thought about the little girl who had blown out 16 candles alone, wishing for attention she never received. That girl felt like a distant memory now, replaced by someone stronger, someone unwilling to remain silent any longer. Downstairs, she could hear the faint murmur of preparations already underway, the household staff arranging chairs and refreshments for the afternoon gathering, unaware of the tension that would soon fill the room. Isabella paused at her window, watching the driveway where cars would soon begin arriving, carrying men who had built their fortunes and reputations alongside her father, men whose respect he valued perhaps even more than he realized. She thought about Marco's careful planning, about the documents and photographs that would soon be laid bare before all of them, undeniable evidence of Camille's betrayal. She thought about her mother, who had endured months of quiet suffering with a strength Isabella was only beginning to fully appreciate. And she thought about her father, a man capable of great power and control in every aspect of his life except, it seemed, the ability to see clearly when it came to matters of the heart. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Renata stood in the doorway, dressed elegantly but simply, her expression a careful blend of determination and lingering anxiety. "Are you ready?" her mother asked. Isabella took a deep breath, steadying herself against the nervous energy coursing through her body. "As ready as I'll ever be." Together, they descended the staircase, joining Marco in the hallway outside the study where Vincent's associates had begun to gather. Through the partially open door, Isabella could hear her father's voice, warm and confident, greeting his guests with the easy charisma that had built his empire over so many years. He had no idea that within the hour, that empire's greatest threat would be exposed before the very men whose trust he depended upon most. Marco caught Isabella's eye and gave a small, reassuring nod. "Remember," he said quietly, "we present the facts calmly, clearly. Let the evidence speak for itself. Your father will need time to process what we reveal, but he will listen, especially with his associates present as witnesses." Isabella nodded, feeling the weight of the coming moment settle heavily across her shoulders. Whatever happened next, there would be no turning back from this confrontation, no way to unreveal the truth once it had been spoken aloud in that room full of powerful men. The storm that had been building since that quiet, overlooked birthday was finally about to break. The study fell completely silent the moment Isabella stepped through the door with a folder clutched tightly in her hands. Vincent looked up from his conversation with a group of 6 men, his expression shifting from mild surprise to confusion as his wife, daughter, and most trusted associate entered the room together, their faces set with unmistakable purpose. The other men in the room, powerful figures within his organization, exchanged curious glances, sensing immediately that something significant was about to unfold. "Isabella, Renata," Vincent said, setting down his glass of scotch, "this is a private business meeting. Perhaps we can talk later." "This concerns your business directly," Marco said firmly, stepping forward before Vincent could dismiss them entirely. "And it concerns your family's safety. We need to speak now, Vincent, in front of everyone here." Vincent's expression darkened, though curiosity seemed to override his initial irritation. "What is this about?" Isabella stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the folder, though her voice remained steady when she spoke. "It's about Camille, Dad. About what she's really been doing this entire time." A few of the men shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly recognizing the name and understanding the delicate nature of the conversation about to unfold. Vincent's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of defensiveness and dawning apprehension. "Whatever you think you know," Vincent began, his voice carrying a warning edge, "I suggest you consider very carefully before making accusations you cannot support." "We can support them," Marco said, placing the photographs on the desk before him. "Every single one." Vincent's eyes dropped to the images, his expression flickering through confusion, then recognition, then something colder and more dangerous as he studied the photographs of Camille meeting privately with Salvatore Conti. The room remained utterly silent, every man present watching their boss process the revelation unfolding before him. "This proves nothing," Vincent said finally, though his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. "Camille could have legitimate reasons for meeting with Conti." "She's been providing him with your shipping schedules," Marco said bluntly. "Your financial records, security details. Everything he needs to move against your operations at precisely the right moment." Renata stepped forward then, her voice steady despite the emotion visible in her eyes. "Vincent, I know this is difficult to hear. I know how much you've invested in this relationship, but your daughter overheard Camille herself discussing a deal that needed to happen before you discovered the truth." Vincent's gaze shifted to Isabella, something raw and vulnerable flickering across his features for just a moment before he composed himself once more. "You heard this yourself." "At her birthday party," Isabella confirmed, her voice unwavering despite the tension thick in the air around them. "I heard her tell a man that you trusted her completely, and that trust was exactly what made everything possible." The silence that followed felt endless, stretching across the room like a held breath. Vincent's associates watched their boss carefully, waiting to see how he would respond to evidence that threatened not just his personal relationships, but potentially the security of everything he had built over decades of careful, ruthless business. "I need proof beyond photographs and overheard conversations," Vincent said finally, though his voice carried less conviction than before. "Something concrete." Marco nodded, having anticipated this exact response. "I have recordings," he said, producing a small device from his jacket pocket. "Conversations between Camille and Conti, captured over the past several days. I believe you should hear them privately first, before we discuss this further with everyone present." Vincent's face had gone pale, the confident mask he wore so effortlessly beginning to crack under the weight of mounting evidence. He glanced around the room at his associates, men who had witnessed this humiliating revelation unfold in real time, before nodding stiffly toward Marco. "Everyone, please give us a moment," Vincent said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. The associates filed out of the room quickly, murmuring quietly among themselves, leaving Vincent alone with his family and his most trusted advisor. The moment the door closed, Vincent's composed exterior finally crumbled, revealing the exhaustion and disbelief that had been building beneath the surface throughout the entire confrontation. "Play it," Vincent said quietly, sinking into his chair. Marco pressed a button on the device, and Camille's voice filled the room, cold and calculating in a way that bore no resemblance to the warm, affectionate tone she had always used with Vincent. The recording captured her discussing specific details of his operations with Conti, laughing about how easily she had gained his trust, how simple it had been to manipulate a man so desperate for excitement outside his ordinary responsibilities. Isabella watched her father's face throughout the recording, watched the color drain from his cheeks, watched the muscles in his jaw clench tighter with each damning revelation. When the recording finally ended, silence descended over the room once more, heavier and more suffocating than before. "How long have you known?" Vincent asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I began investigating after the party," Marco said. Isabella's observations that night were the first indication that something was wrong. Vincent turned to look at his daughter, something complicated and raw shifting across his features. "You knew before any of us. You suspected her from the very beginning." "I suspected something wasn't right," Isabella said carefully. "But I didn't know the full extent until Marco started investigating properly." Vincent ran a hand across his face, the weight of the betrayal settling visibly across his shoulders. "I nearly lost everything because I couldn't see past my own selfishness," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else in the room. "While I was busy planning parties and buying jewelry, my own daughter was the one paying attention to what actually mattered." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and unguarded in a way Isabella had never witnessed from her father before. She felt a complicated mixture of vindication and sorrow, watching him finally confront the reality he had been avoiding for so many months. "What happens now?" Renata asked quietly, breaking the heavy silence. Vincent's expression hardened with resolve, the earlier vulnerability giving way to something more familiar, more controlled. "Now, we handle this properly. Camille needs to be confronted, and Conti's plans need to be stopped before they can move forward." "Vincent," Marco said carefully, "there's something else you need to consider. Camille mentioned your family specifically in one of the recordings. If she believes her plan is at risk of exposure, she may try to use Isabella or Renata as leverage." Fear flashed across Vincent's face, quick and unmistakable. "What exactly did she say?" Marco hesitated before answering. "She indicated that your family's safety could be useful if you proved difficult to control through other means." Vincent's hands clenched into fists at his sides, fury replacing the earlier shock in his expression. "She threatened my daughter." "Not explicitly," Marco clarified, but the implication was clear enough. Isabella watched something shift in her father then, a protective fury igniting behind his eyes that she had rarely witnessed directed toward anything beyond his business interests. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she saw genuine fear for her safety reflected in his expression, fear that outweighed even the humiliation of Camille's betrayal. "We need to move quickly," Vincent said, his voice regaining its familiar authority. "Marco, arrange increased security around the house immediately. I want eyes on Camille's movements at all times until we determine exactly how to handle this situation." "Already done," Marco confirmed. "I anticipated you would want additional precautions once you understood the full scope of the threat." Vincent nodded, though his gaze drifted back toward Isabella, studying her with an expression that mixed guilt, admiration, and something that looked remarkably like fear at how close he had come to losing everything through his own blindness. "Isabella," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology I don't know how to properly express. You were paying attention when I should have been. You protected this family when I was too consumed by my own selfish desires to see the danger surrounding us." Isabella felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, unexpected emotion rising after weeks of careful composure. "I just didn't want anyone else to get hurt," she said softly, "not because of something that was never real to begin with." Vincent crossed the room and pulled his daughter into an embrace, the first genuine, unguarded moment of affection Isabella could remember sharing with him in longer than she cared to admit. "You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for," he murmured against her hair. "Stronger than I've been, apparently." The moment was interrupted by Marco's phone, buzzing urgently in his pocket. He answered quickly, his expression growing increasingly alarmed as he listened to whoever was speaking on the other end of the line. "We have a problem," Marco said, ending the call abruptly. "Camille knows we've discovered her plan. She's already left the city, and Conti's men have been spotted near the house." Vincent's protective fury returned instantly, his earlier vulnerability giving way to sharp, decisive action. "Get Renata and Isabella somewhere safe immediately," he ordered, already moving toward the door to address the security concerns directly. "I want this handled tonight, before Conti has the opportunity to escalate this situation any further." As chaos erupted around them, security personnel rushing through the halls, urgent phone calls being made to secure the property, Isabella felt a strange calm settle over her despite the danger closing in around her family. She had spent so long fighting to be seen, to be prioritized, to matter within the complicated world her father inhabited. Now, finally, she had his full attention, though the circumstances were far more dangerous than she had ever anticipated when this journey began with a forgotten birthday and 4 rushed minutes of distracted affection. Whatever happened in the hours ahead, Isabella knew that everything about her relationship with her father had changed irrevocably. The question now was whether that change would be enough to protect her family from the danger Camille's betrayal had set into motion. Marco guided Renata and Isabella through a side hallway toward a reinforced room at the back of the house, a space Isabella had rarely entered before, one designed specifically for moments exactly like this. Heavy shutters slid closed across the windows at the press of a hidden switch, and Marco positioned 2 armed guards outside the door before turning back to reassure them. "You'll be safe here," he said. "I need to help Vincent secure the perimeter. Do not open this door for anyone except myself or your father." Renata nodded, pulling Isabella close beside her on a small couch positioned against the far wall. The room was sparse but functional, containing a few chairs, a small table, and a bank of monitors that flickered with live feeds from cameras positioned around the property's exterior. "This is really happening," Isabella whispered, watching the grainy footage of the driveway and gardens outside, searching for any sign of movement among the shadows. "Your father will handle this," Renata said, though her voice carried an uncertainty that betrayed her attempt at reassurance. "He's dealt with threats before. This is not entirely unfamiliar territory for him, even if it feels overwhelming to us." Isabella watched the monitors intently, her heart pounding as she tried to process everything that had unfolded within the span of a single evening. Hours earlier, she had walked into that study prepared to expose a betrayal, never anticipating that the confrontation would spiral so quickly into genuine danger for her entire family. On one of the monitors, movement flickered near the edge of the property, dark figures moving cautiously through the trees lining the perimeter wall. Isabella's breath caught in her throat as she watched security personnel converge toward that location, radios crackling with urgent, clipped communication. "Mom," Isabella whispered, pointing toward the screen, "do you see that?" Renata leaned forward, her face paling as she studied the shadowy figures on the monitor. "Marco's men are already responding," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "Your father anticipated this. He wasn't caught unprepared." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they watched the tense standoff unfold across the monitors, unable to hear anything beyond the muffled sounds filtering through the reinforced walls of their safe room. Isabella gripped her mother's hand tightly, both of them holding their breath as security personnel moved methodically through the darkened grounds, searching for any sign of the intruders who had been spotted near the property. Eventually, the radio chatter grew calmer, the urgent movements on the monitors slowing to something more controlled and deliberate. Isabella watched as several unfamiliar men were escorted away from the property in restraints, their expressions hidden by shadow but their postures unmistakably defeated. A knock sounded at the door, 3 sharp raps followed by a pause, a signal Marco had established before leaving them alone in the safe room. Renata rose cautiously to check through the small viewing panel before unlocking the door, revealing Marco's exhausted but relieved expression. "It's handled," he said, stepping into the room. "Conti's men were intercepted before they could reach the house. Your father is coordinating with law enforcement contacts to ensure this threat is neutralized completely." "And Camille?" Isabella asked, her voice tight with lingering tension. Marco's expression darkened slightly. "She's disappeared for now, but her network has been severely compromised tonight. She won't be able to operate freely within your father's territory any longer, not after this exposure." Relief flooded through Isabella, though it remained tangled with lingering fear and the emotional exhaustion of everything that had transpired since she first stepped into that study, with evidence of Camille's betrayal clutched tightly in her hands. Renata pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, both of them finally allowing themselves a moment to process the magnitude of what they had survived together. "Your father wants to see you both," Marco said gently. "He's waiting in the main hall." They followed Marco through the quieted house, past security personnel still securing various entry points, until they reached Vincent standing near the entrance, his suit jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up, exhaustion and relief mingling clearly across his features. The moment he saw them, he crossed the distance quickly, pulling both his wife and daughter into a fierce embrace. "You're safe," he murmured, holding them close. "Thank God you're both safe." For the first time in longer than Isabella could remember, she felt the full weight of her father's attention, his genuine relief and protectiveness overwhelming any lingering resentment from the months of neglect that had preceded this dangerous night. It was not the celebration or attention she had once wished for on her birthday, but it was real, undeniably real, in a way that felt more valuable than any party or elaborate gesture could have provided. Later that night, once the security teams had finished their sweep of the property, and the household had settled into an uneasy quiet, Vincent found Isabella sitting alone on the back porch, staring out at the dark garden where the fountain still trickled softly beneath the moonlight. "May I join you?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Isabella nodded, shifting slightly to make room on the bench beside her. Vincent sat down carefully, silent for a long moment, as though searching for words that had never felt necessary to find before tonight. "I keep thinking about your birthday," he said finally. "About how I walked out that door for 4 minutes and then disappeared into a world that nearly cost me everything that actually matters." "You're here now," Isabella said quietly. "That's not enough," Vincent replied, shaking his head. "It's not enough to simply be here after everything that happened. I need to be here consistently, deliberately, the way a father should be, not just when danger forces my attention back to what should have mattered all along." Isabella studied her father's face in the dim moonlight, searching for the sincerity behind his words, wondering if this moment of clarity would fade once the immediate danger had fully passed. But something in his expression felt different now, stripped of the practiced charm and calculated confidence he usually wore so effortlessly. "I want to believe you," she said honestly, "but it's going to take more than one night of danger to fix what's been broken for a long time." "I know," Vincent said softly, "and I intend to prove it, however long it takes." They sat together in silence for a while longer, the fountain's gentle trickle filling the space between them, a fragile beginning to whatever repair might still be possible between a father who had finally seen clearly and a daughter who had spent far too long standing unnoticed in the shadows of his distraction. 3 weeks after the night security teams swept through the property in search of Conti's men, A courier arrived at the Morty house carrying an envelope with no return address. Vincent opened it in the study, his expression darkening as he read the single page inside. Marco, standing beside him, watched the color drain from his employer's face. "What is it?" Marco asked. "A message from Camille," Vincent said, his voice flat and controlled despite the fury simmering beneath the surface. "She wants to meet. She claims she can explain everything, that Conti forced her into this position against her will." Marco's expression hardened with skepticism. "You don't believe that?" "No," Vincent said, setting the letter down with deliberate calm. "But I want to know exactly what she's planning next. If she thinks she can talk her way back into my life after everything that happened, she's more delusional than I gave her credit for." Isabella, who had entered the study just in time to hear this exchange, felt a chill run through her at the mention of Camille's name. "You're not actually considering meeting with her, are you?" Vincent turned to his daughter, something resolute settling into his expression. "I need to end this properly, Isabella. Not through Marco's intermediaries, not through security sweeps and intercepted messages. I need to look her in the eyes and make it absolutely clear that whatever influence she once held over me is finished completely." "That sounds dangerous," Renata said, appearing in the doorway with visible concern etched across her features. "What if this is another trap?" "It might be," Vincent admitted. "Which is why I won't be going alone." The meeting was arranged for the following evening, in a public restaurant chosen specifically for its security cameras and constant flow of witnesses, a location Marco had personally vetted and surrounded with additional protection. Isabella and Renata remained at home, though the tension of waiting for news felt almost as unbearable as the danger itself. When Vincent finally returned that night, his expression carried a complicated mixture of exhaustion and quiet triumph. He found his wife and daughter waiting anxiously in the living room, both rising immediately as he entered. "It's finished," Vincent said, sinking into a chair with visible relief. "Camille attempted to convince me that Conti had manipulated her from the beginning, that she never truly intended to betray me. But Marco's men recorded the entire conversation, and her own words revealed the calculated nature of everything she had done." "What happens to her now?" Isabella asked. "She's no longer welcome in this city, or in any territory connected to my operations," Vincent said grimly. "Conti's network has been severely weakened by tonight's exposure as well. Between the recordings Marco gathered and the connections we've made with law enforcement contacts, both of them will find it extremely difficult to operate freely going forward." Relief washed over Isabella, though it remained tempered by the knowledge that danger had come dangerously close to consuming everything her family valued. She studied her father's face, searching for signs of the man who had once been so completely consumed by infatuation that he had missed his own daughter's birthday celebration entirely. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. Vincent considered the question seriously before answering. "I will be," he said. "It's difficult, confronting how easily I allowed myself to be manipulated, how much I nearly sacrificed because of my own selfish desires. But I'm grateful, more grateful than I know how to properly express, that you were paying attention when I wasn't." The weeks that followed brought gradual, meaningful changes to the rhythm of the Morty household. Vincent began arriving home earlier, prioritizing family dinners over late business meetings whenever possible. He asked Isabella about her schoolwork with genuine curiosity, remembered details about her friendships and interests that he had previously overlooked entirely. It was not a perfect transformation. Old habits proved difficult to break completely, and Isabella occasionally caught glimpses of her father's distraction returning during particularly demanding periods at work. But the effort felt genuine, sustained in a way that slowly began rebuilding the trust that had eroded over months of neglect and hidden betrayal. Renata, too, seemed to find a renewed sense of peace within their household. The constant tension that had characterized her expression for so long gradually softened, replaced by something closer to the contentment Isabella remembered from earlier years, before Camille's presence had cast such a long shadow over their family. Marco remained a steady, trusted presence throughout this period of healing, though his role gradually shifted from investigator back toward his familiar position as Vincent's loyal advisor. Isabella found herself grateful for his continued involvement in their lives, for the quiet wisdom and protective instincts that had ultimately helped save her family from a danger they might not have survived otherwise. One afternoon, several weeks after Camille's final confrontation with Vincent, Isabella found herself sitting in the garden with Alina, finally able to share the full story of everything that had unfolded since that quiet, overlooked birthday months earlier. "That's completely insane," Alina said, shaking her head in amazement after Isabella finished recounting the dangerous events of recent weeks. "I can't believe you went through all of that." "Neither can I honestly," Isabella admitted. "It still feels surreal sometimes, thinking about how close everything came to falling apart." "But things are better now?" Alina asked. "With your dad, I mean." Isabella considered the question thoughtfully, watching sunlight filter through the leaves above them, casting gentle patterns across the garden's stone pathways. "They're better," she said finally. "Not perfect, but better. He's trying, genuinely trying, in ways he never seemed to before." "That's good," Alina said, smiling warmly. "You deserve that, Bella. You deserve to feel prioritized by your own family." During this period of gradual healing, Isabella also noticed changes in the relationship between her parents, subtle shifts that suggested the marriage itself was being rebuilt alongside the trust between father and daughter. Vincent began making time for quiet dinners with Renata, occasions unrelated to business obligations or social appearances, simple evenings where they seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company again. "I never thought I would see him like this again," Renata confided to Isabella one afternoon, as they folded laundry together in a moment of ordinary domestic peace that felt almost miraculous after months of quiet suffering. "Attentive, present, actually listening when I speak rather than simply waiting for his turn to talk about business matters." "Do you think it will last?" Isabella asked honestly, still holding onto a cautious skepticism despite the positive changes she had witnessed. Renata considered the question carefully before answering. "I don't know for certain," she admitted, "but I believe he understands now, in a way he never did before, exactly how close he came to losing everything that actually mattered. Sometimes people need to nearly lose something completely before they truly understand its value." Isabella found comfort in her mother's cautious optimism, though she remained watchful, unwilling to fully release the protective instincts that had developed during those difficult months of investigation and danger. Trust, she had learned, was not something rebuilt overnight through single gestures or heartfelt apologies, no matter how sincere they seemed in the moment. Marco continued visiting the house regularly, though his conversations with Vincent gradually shifted away from security concerns and back toward ordinary business matters. Isabella appreciated his continued presence in their lives, grateful for the steady, protective influence he had provided throughout the most dangerous period her family had ever faced. "You handled everything with remarkable courage," Marco told her one afternoon, finding her reading in the garden near the fountain where their earlier conversations about Camille had first begun. "Not many 16-year-olds would have shown such determination in the face of genuine danger." "I didn't feel courageous," Isabella admitted. "Mostly I felt terrified the entire time." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Marco said, settling onto the bench beside her with the familiar warmth she had always appreciated in his presence. "It's acting despite that fear, doing what needs to be done even when every instinct tells you to remain silent and safe. You did that, Isabella, when it mattered most. Isabella considered his words thoughtfully, recognizing the truth in them even as she continued processing everything that had happened since her 16th birthday had first exposed the cracks in her family's carefully maintained facade. She had grown considerably during these past months, transforming from a girl who felt invisible and overlooked into someone capable of protecting the people she loved most, even when the danger felt overwhelming. School continued providing a welcome sense of normalcy throughout this period of gradual healing. Isabella found herself more present during classes, more engaged with friends, no longer distracted by the constant undercurrent of anxiety that had characterized her daily life during the height of the danger surrounding her family. Alina remained a steady, supportive presence throughout, celebrating each small sign of positive change within the Morty household, alongside her closest friend. As autumn deepened into the early weeks of winter, the Morty household settled into a new, more honest rhythm. Vincent's business continued to thrive, though he approached his operations with a renewed caution, an attentiveness that Marco noted had been sorely lacking during the period of Camille's manipulative influence. Isabella noticed small but meaningful changes accumulating over time. Her father attended a school event for the first time in years, arriving early rather than slipping in unnoticed during the final minutes. He asked thoughtful questions about her future plans, her aspirations beyond the sheltered world of their family's complicated business. Slowly, carefully, the foundation of genuine connection began rebuilding itself between them. One evening, as winter's first snow began falling softly outside their windows, Vincent called his family together in the living room, his expression carrying a mixture of nervousness and quiet determination that Isabella had rarely witnessed from him before. "I've been thinking about everything that happened," he said, standing before them with obvious vulnerability. "About the mistakes I made, about how close I came to losing everything that actually matters because I let myself become distracted by something false and manipulative." Renata reached for his hand, offering silent support as he continued. "I know an apology cannot undo months of neglect," Vincent said, turning his attention directly toward Isabella. "But I want you to know how genuinely sorry I am for every missed dinner, every forgotten promise, every moment where I chose distraction over the daughter who deserved so much better from me." Isabella felt tears gathering in her eyes, unexpected emotion rising after months of careful composure and hard-won strength. "Thank you for saying that," she said softly. "It means more than you probably realize." "I want to make it right," Vincent continued, his voice thick with sincerity. "Starting now, starting with this moment, and continuing for as long as it takes to prove that you can trust the promises I make from here forward." The family stood together in comfortable silence for a long moment, watching snow accumulate gently outside their windows, marking the beginning of a new season, a new chapter in their complicated, hard-won journey toward healing and genuine connection. Later that evening, after Renata had retired upstairs and the house had settled into peaceful quiet, Vincent found Isabella once again on the back porch, wrapped in a warm blanket against the winter chill, watching snowflakes drift lazily past the porch light. "I have something for you," he said, settling beside her and producing a small, carefully wrapped box from his jacket pocket. Isabella accepted it curiously, unwrapping the paper to reveal a delicate silver bracelet, simple and elegant, nothing like the extravagant jewelry Camille had once flaunted so publicly. "It's beautiful," Isabella said, studying the intricate design. "I wanted to give you something that actually reflected who you are," Vincent explained, "rather than something meant to impress others or compensate for absence. This bracelet, it's simple, genuine, made to last, much like the relationship I hope we can continue building together." Isabella fastened the bracelet around her wrist, feeling the weight of its meaning settle over her with quiet significance. It was not the million-dollar celebration Camille had once received, nor did it need to be. This small, thoughtful gesture carried more genuine love and attention than any extravagant party could have provided. "Happy belated birthday," Vincent said softly, "for real this time." Isabella smiled, leaning against her father's shoulder as snow continued falling gently around them, transforming the garden into something quiet and peaceful, a fitting backdrop for the fragile, hopeful beginning of a relationship finally built on honesty rather than distraction and neglect. "Can I ask you something?" Isabella said after a comfortable silence had settled between them. "Anything," Vincent replied. "Do you regret it? Everything with Camille, I mean. Not just because it nearly destroyed everything, but genuinely, do you regret it?" Vincent considered the question seriously, taking his time before answering. "I regret the pain it caused you and your mother more than I can properly express," he said slowly. "I regret allowing myself to become so consumed by something false that I nearly lost sight of everything real and meaningful in my life. But I also recognize that the experience taught me something essential about myself, about the kind of father and husband I want to actually be, rather than the distracted, distant man I had allowed myself to become." Isabella absorbed his honest answer thoughtfully, appreciating the vulnerability behind it. "I'm glad you learned that," she said. "Even if the way we learned it was terrifying." "So am I," Vincent agreed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as the snow continued its gentle descent around them. "Terrifying, but necessary, apparently, for both of us to finally see clearly what actually matters." They sat together for a while longer, watching the winter landscape transform beneath the steady snowfall, father and daughter finally finding common ground after months of distance and hidden danger. Isabella thought about the frightened, overlooked girl who had blown out 16 candles alone months earlier, wishing desperately for attention she never received. That girl felt like a distant memory now, replaced by someone stronger, more confident, and finally, genuinely seen by the father who had once been too distracted to notice her at all. Whatever challenges lay ahead for their family, whatever difficulties remained in fully repairing the damage of months spent overshadowed by Camille's calculated manipulation, Isabella felt confident that they would face them together now, as a family finally united by truth rather than divided by hidden secrets and quiet suffering. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind something stronger and more resilient in its wake. A family that had nearly lost everything but had found their way back to what truly mattered most.